The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. This is Yvonne Evers, and welcome to Have Trouble Finding New Board Members, my webinar on board succession planning and recruiting new board members. Thank you so much for being here today. I see other people coming on the line yet, but we will get started so that we can stay on track here. You know, I talk about board succession planning throughout the country, and a lot of times one of the biggest questions is, how do you find new board members? And so I have held a number of different sessions where I had people talk about their different strategies. And so what I ended up doing is putting all the strategies together, and there were 13 of them. And that's what I want to share with you today, and then talk to you a little bit about a solution to board succession planning that I've developed as well. So I really appreciate that you're here. Welcome. I hope you find this really valuable. So let's start with me. Here I am, since I'm not there in person with you. And in case you don't know me, this is me, Yvonne Evers, CEO and owner of YME Coaching and Consulting here in Madison, Wisconsin. The mission of our company is helping executives and board members drive organizational success with confidence and ease. We do this through providing individual and group executive coaching programs, leadership development training. I do board governance training, strategic planning, and of course, my passion, both CEO and board succession planning. I am the creator of Succession, which is a unique software application that helps organizations both develop either a CEO management succession plan or a board succession plan, or you can use the software for both. There are two modules, and I'm going to give you just a glimpse of that software later in the program. Before becoming an executive coach, I did human resource consulting for a little over 15 years. I'm also on the board of the University of Wisconsin Credit Union. We have about $2 billion in assets, and I am currently the chair of the board there. So you might say, well, why am I an expert in this, and why should you listen to me? Well, first of all, this is my personal story. I've worked with hundreds of credit unions over the years. I've now been working with credit unions for well over 20 years. And I've worked with hundreds of credit unions, from small credit unions to the very large credit unions. So I have a lot of industry experience. I've coached many CEOs and boards on succession planning. I did it informally when I was doing HR consulting. I started doing it more formally as I was doing executive coaching and board development. But then I created a more formal automated process, and now I'm doing it on a more formal basis. I've experienced personally major director turnover at our own credit union as a board member, and it can be very frustrating. I know it firsthand, and I'm going to share our story with you because many of you are probably experiencing the same thing, or have experienced the same thing, or are maybe about to, and you don't even know it because we didn't know it. I kind of figured it was going to happen, but there were a number of our board members who said, no, we're not going to have any problems. And so I'm going to share that with you, my experience. And also, I've done a lot of research on succession planning, both for CEO and management and for boards. And I've created an online tool called Succession. Like I said, I'll tell you a little bit about that a little later. So what can happen if you're not prepared? You could have major turnover. And I'm going to tell you about our experience, but I've worked with credit unions. There was one credit union that I was working with one time. They had done a board self-assessment, and I was working with them, doing a presentation with them to go over the results. And I got to the credit union, and we were in the boardroom, and the board members were coming in. The CEO was there, and they were all chatting. And so I knew they had a good rapport. They were kidding the CEO. CEO was kidding with the board members. There was a good rapport. And as I was going through the board self-assessment results, one of the things that came up was, do you have a board succession plan? And they rated really low on that because, of course, they didn't. So then I asked the board members if they had an informal plan. So I thought, well, they don't have a formal plan, but maybe they have an informal plan. And they said, one person raised their hand and said, well, and they were almost all kind of in their mid 50s to 60, early 60s, as well as the CEO. And one of the board members raised his hand and said, I'm planning to retire when the CEO retires. Then another person raised his hand and said the same thing. Then another person raised her hand and said the same thing. There were probably 5 out of the 9 who raised their hand and said the same thing. That's not a good succession planning process, to have the CEO and the board turning over at the same time. But I've heard this in a number of other situations where the CEO's been there a really long time and the board members have been there a really long time. And they have this good rapport, and they decide to leave. The board members decide to leave when the CEO's leaving. That's not good. It can cause problems, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But what else can happen? You can have difficulty finding new members, and it's difficult enough to find one good board member. If you are trying to find more than one, or trying to find one every year for the number of years or a couple of years, I have clients who there are 2 credit unions that I worked with that had vacancies for a year or more because they couldn't find board members. And one of the credit unions actually ended up calling a former board member to come back on the board again. So it is difficult, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this webinar for you guys, and also really focus on finding new board members. Also, what can happen, you can have a board that doesn't have the right skills. And that's one of the things we talk about in board succession planning is, what are the competencies that we should have represented on our board? And it's different from credit union to credit union. And the last one is lack of experience for board leadership. You can have so much turnover on your board that you lack any tenure. And then when you're looking at board, when you're looking at your board leadership, trying to figure out who's going to be chair, who's going to be vice chair, that sort of thing, you have people who are inexperienced. They haven't been at the credit union. They don't know the credit union very well. And some of my clients have had to actually make one of the new board members the chair of the board. Oh, here's another one. There's also can be an unanticipated change in the board culture. The board could have the same culture, a good culture of working together, but there could be an unanticipated change. I can also tell you what happens is, when you don't have a lot of turnover for a while, everybody's on the same page, and so meetings can run fairly smoothly. But then suddenly you have a lot of turnover, and what you have to do, and especially as chair during this time, I've had to make sure that I'm explaining things a little bit more. Like, well, there's a decision that has to be made, and we wouldn't necessarily in the past have explained it in detail because all of the board members have been there. Now I have to remember, now there are a number of new board members. We have to explain things again. There's constant for us right now, as I'll tell you our story, there's constant onboarding of new board members, which takes a lot of time. So let me tell you our story, because it does really get at the issues that can happen if you don't do board succession planning, and then also kind of solutions that you can come up with. So first of all, we started talking about the need for board succession planning back in 2008. At that time, our average age of our board was about 66 and a half years old. At that point, our CEO had been with the credit union for about 5 years, and we were kind of looking at our board saying, we haven't had a lot of turnover. Maybe we should kind of figure out what our board turnover, when that might happen, and have a plan in place. So we tasked the board development committee with that assignment to try to take a look at what we should be doing at UW Credit Union with board succession planning. And I was the chair of the board development committee, became chair in 2008. And so this was really one of my first tasks. So we talked about it. There were 5 board members, including myself, on the board development committee, big representation of the board on the committee. And we talked about it. And we all agreed, we came up with a first draft of the policy, brought it to the board in June of 2009, and we said, okay, what we'd like to do is have term limits of 5 3-year terms or 15 years or age 75. And everybody who's currently on the board would be grandfathered in. And so everybody said, I agree, that's a good idea, let's go with it. And so we actually came up with a draft policy and everything. We brought it to the board, and it didn't go over well. This is how I felt, like, help. The board members who were not on the committee said, why are you doing this? That's not fair. We've never had problems before. Why do we need board succession planning? Why do we need term limits? And it was almost like the other board members weren't a part of my committee because they weren't helping me out at all. So I decided, we could have pushed it through. We had 5 members out of 9 who were in agreement with this, but we decided that we wouldn't do that we would go back to the drawing board. I decided to talk to each of the board members who weren't on the board and get them to tell me a little bit about how they were feeling, why they were feeling the way they were feeling, and being a consultant, I was like, I have to figure this out. What could we do to make sure that we're prepared? So I developed a new concept into a policy and brought it to the board in February of 2010. Of course, our whole committee agreed again. And what it was we decided, and we had a number of board members who had 15 plus years of experience on the board. We decided that they would complete a succession planning form. And on the succession planning form, they would tell us if they anticipated on completing their current term and running again the next time they were up for election, and then when the year that they might anticipate leaving the board. Then we had all of the other board members complete what we called an intentions form, and we have them completed annually. And on that form, they state the year that they would anticipate leaving, and they also give us some flexibility. So when could you leave? Could you leave earlier? Could you stay later? But also we ask them, are you going to continue your current term, complete your current term? Are you going to run for the next term? And I did. It was approved. We were really happy, but I did have to say, please, let's just try this and see what happens. Some of you feel like there's not going to be any issues, but let's just try it. Maybe there are no issues. Well, what we found out was after the first year of doing our intentions forms and our succession planning forms, we found out that we would have 6 board members leaving within a 4-year period, which is huge. We had decided we really don't want more than one person leaving in a year, and we really didn't want one leaving, constantly year after year, leaving the board. But we had 6. And in the meantime, one of the 3 who said they could stay longer had to leave suddenly. So that was 7 people leaving in a 4-year period. The good thing about doing board succession planning is that we could take a look at that 4-year period, who is leaving, and make sure that there's not more than one person leaving in a year. And this is now our 5th year of completing the intentions forms, and it's going really well. What we do is the board development committee, we actually, and what I encourage my clients to do is to have the board members complete the intentions forms once a year, and we do it during our organizational meeting month, and many of my clients do the same thing. You're doing a lot of things for the organizational meeting, so why not do this as well? And then update your succession plan. And so the board development committee takes those forms, updates the succession plan, and then provides the nominating committee with what gaps we might have and what type of person we might be looking for. So, and the plan is updated on a regular basis. I tell my clients, and we do it as well. We update it. We actually update it a couple times a year. I tell my clients at least one time a year, you should be taking a really close look at this and letting your nominating committee know what type of people you're going to be looking for. So there are 3 major issues resulting from all of this turnover. First of all, it's finding new board members. How do you find new board members that have the right skills? Then it's planning for board leadership. And it's also board onboarding, really having to do a lot of board onboarding, but having that process in place to do that board onboarding. But today I'm going to focus on finding new board members for our session today. So, do you know where your next board member is coming from? The biggest problem is finding potential board members. So one of the things that when I'm giving a presentation that people will actually stand up and argue about is whether, first of all, the CEO or other executive managers should be involved in recruiting new board members. And there's always one group in the room that says, no, the CEO should not be involved because this person or persons are going to be the CEO's boss. They could stack the deck. They could pick their friend to be on the board. And then there are other people who say, well, the CEOs out in the community or the other executive managers, they may have people approaching them saying, I would like to be a board member, or they know somebody who would be a really good board member. So what I generally will recommend is I encourage you to have your CEO give you some ideas of who might be a good board member. Then it's your role, especially your nominating committee, to vet those board members and to choose whether they are a good board member or not. Our CEO attends nominating committee meetings and interviews with candidates, but only to answer questions about the credit union, if there's something that the board members can't answer. Does not have any say in whether that person moves on to the election process or not. And so I recommend highly that the CEO at least give you some names. You don't have to go with them, but at least ask them because that person's really out in the community representing you. So how do you find board members? And like I said, I've been doing a lot of presentations all over the country, and I've done breakout sessions where we've just focused on strategies. And so these were the top 13 strategies that have come out of these breakout sessions that I'm going to share with you today. So the first one is to send out e-blasts to your members. When it's time for you to start recruiting, and really you should be recruiting all year round. It has become a process for us. We have really good board members. We've had already 3 people. We have three new board members plus a new associate board member and a new committee member who we're hoping to be an associate board member next January. And so send out an e-blast to members, letting them know that you're recruiting new board members. Also, you can advertise the search on the credit union's website. So many of my credit union clients, many of the credit unions that I've given presentations to, when we talked about this, they'll say, when we are interested in looking for new board members, we'll put it on our website and we'll have a link to a job description and a packet that they can complete, or the link will go to information, but then it'll say, please contact a certain person, maybe an executive assistant, to get a packet, an application. Ask your current board members to provide names of potential members. And so when we first started and we didn't have a list of potential people, what we did was our nominating committee chair came in after a board meeting one time. We went into executive session and she said, before you leave today, I'd really like you to write down 3 names of people who you think might be good board members. It doesn't matter if you know whether they're members of the credit union or not at this point, but we just need to start somewhere. This is when we first figured out that we're going to have a lot of board turnover. So you can ask your current board members. You don't want, obviously you don't want to develop too many people to know too many others where you're developing cliques on the board, but it is good to ask your current board members. You could form a recruiting or search committee just like you would for a CEO search to put an extra focus on finding the right individuals. And I can tell you I'm very proud of our nominating committee, especially our chair and our CEO for that matter, have done an incredible job of finding new board members that have the competencies that we're looking for. And many times board members who you might want to have on your board are really involved in other boards or in the community, and they can't do it right away. We've had people say to us, I can't do it now, but I could do it in 1.5 years when I get off this other board, or in 2 years. And we actually have had some of those people come on board now with us, and they're worth waiting for. And then it's part of your plan. It becomes part of your plan then when they're going to be coming on. You can ask your CEO for names. We talked a little bit about that. If you do monthly statement stuffers, you can stick an announcement in there saying, hey, we're looking for board members. This is how much time is required. This is the role of a board member. This is how you apply to be a board member. One of the things I want to say here too is, many credit unions will go through a lot of this, incorporate a lot of these strategies. It's not that you have to do just one of these strategies. You can incorporate a number of these strategies. But it's very interesting, like with us, I can't remember how many we had this year, but I think it was last year we had like 8 people contact our contact person to talk a little bit about the job. And as soon as the person said it was not compensated, it was volunteer, then people dropped out pretty quickly. But we still ended up with a couple of more people. So it's good to try to use as many of these strategies as you can. You can include an article in your credit union's newsletter highlighting the upcoming election and requesting candidates to apply. You can do a formal succession plan. You can determine the competencies necessary for your board, where your gaps are on the board, and search for individuals with those particular competencies. You can recruit from credit union committees. So most credit unions have a number of committees, standing committees. A lot of them have either a supervisory committee or an audit committee. And when I've done these presentations and asked the strategy that they use the most, I think a lot of people use the strategy of having supervisory committees become their next board members. Now, one of the cautions I always mention when you're using supervisory committee members as your go-to for board members is that that's a really important position too. And if you have a lot of turnover, maybe you want to also have a succession plan for your supervisory committee, because that is a really important job within the credit union as well. And if you're planning on seeing a lot of turnover, you may want to have a succession plan for that committee as well. You can conduct a member outreach event and have board members there talking to introduce your board members. Invite community leaders to speak at or visit your credit union so that they become more familiar with their credit union, maybe become a member, or maybe they are a member, but become more interested in what the credit union is all about and potentially in being a board member. You can make those tabletop flyers that you can put out in your lobby announcing board member elections. I know a lot of credit unions who've done that, and a lot of people who've seen that, and they've gotten people interested in becoming board members from seeing those tabletop flyers. And that also, whenever you're at an event or having a community event, it's always good for you to have introduce your board members, give them special recognition. I think that's important, and that builds the credibility of the board members. So other ways, these are ways to recruit, but then there's also ways to train people. So we talked about number 3, volunteers on committees, using them as potential board members because they get to know the credit union. But an associate director position or a director in training, people have a variety of names for this, has become pretty common, more popular, I would say. Not common, but more popular within the last several years. So people use an associate director as someone who is learning all they can about the credit union. They attend all of the board meetings, but they don't have a vote at the board meeting. They would attend the strategic planning sessions. They don't have any vote on anything at the strategic planning if there is a vote. But generally, I have some credit union clients who have associate directors, like they'll have 2 associate directors, and it doesn't matter how long these people are on the board as an associate director. There are other credit unions that they will limit the time. So let's say they know that they're going to have some turnover in a year or 2. So then they get an associate director on knowing that they will be getting into the director position, probably within a year or 2. And, as an associate director, they can get a feel for what kinds of decisions are made, what the responsibility level is for a board member. They can decide, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I would love to be a board member. And the board can get an idea of, well, are they attending meetings? Do we feel like they're engaging with us? And do we feel like they would be a good board member? And generally what you do for an associate director or a director in trainings, the same thing. You have to vet them the same way you would a board member. So I hope you're out there also doing background checks for your board members. You would do the same thing for your associate director. You would go through the same interview process with your nominating committee. And then I always get a question about, well, do you have to take your associate director then and make them a director? And you don't. If someone leaves in the middle of their term and you need to appoint, you can appoint one of the directors. But an associate director could decide, I'm going to run for an election when the election comes up, even if there are 3 incumbents running. So this is a good way to get your directors trained, and a lot more credit unions are starting to use an associate director. And for those of you on the webinar, I have an associate director sample policy. So if you're interested in that, just send me an email. You'll get my email at the end of the webinar here today. So I really want to drive in that, because I hear this all the time. Oh, you're trying to get rid of the older board members or the long-term board members. We had a board member who's on the board for 42 years, an older gentleman. We weren't trying to get rid of him, but we were trying to anticipate when he might leave so that we could be ready with someone to take his place. So it's not, board succession planning is not about driving long-term or older members out or judging the skill level of current board members, because sometimes people say, well, I don't want to do board succession planning. The board will decide not to do it because they feel like, okay, you're going to pick those competencies, then you're going to judge me on whether I have them or not. That's not the point of this. We're not, and when I'm working with a client on board succession planning, the board determines what competencies they'd like to have represented. Not everybody has to have every competency. And we don't have the board members judge each other. We have the board members do a self-assessment. Do I have this skill as defined by the board or not? So it's not about driving out long-term or older members or judging the skill level. It's about being ready for inevitable turnover and knowing what skills to look for in the future. So let me, before I go on and show you the software and tell you a little bit more about a special offer I have for everybody on the webinar, I want to take questions. And what I should have done is said, you can type in a question. Some of you have already. You can type in a question if you have a question for me in the box on the screen. But I do have some questions here. Let me see. Are all nominating committees made up of all board members? That's a good question. I get this question all the time because people want to know what other credit unions are doing in terms of their nominating committee. Our nominating committee is made up of all board members. There are some credit unions that I work with that have the same practice. I just actually did a board succession planning presentation out west, and there were probably about 80 credit unions or more in the room. And it was interesting. There were a number of credit unions that don't use any board members. They recruit members who then are the nominating committee. So it's all members, none of them of which are on any of the volunteer committees or on the board. So they're members of the credit union. And a number of them talked about their experience and said they had a really good experience with that. And then there are people who have a combination. They have maybe two board members and then a couple of members, just members who aren't on the board or on a volunteer committee. So whatever works for your credit union is good. I actually had someone say we had people who have wanted to be on the board before be on the nominating committee. Obviously, if they're on the nominating committee, they aren't running for the board again. So curious, but they said it has been very successful for them in the past. So a number of options. There's no right or wrong way to do that. Another question. Do you feel that board succession planning isn't democratic? Okay, I get this question a lot too, because people worry that if you're doing board succession planning and you're trying to figure out what competencies you're looking for, and so you're looking for certain people, that then maybe you're putting them on the ballot and you're not being completely democratic. My answer to that, I really feel, and it is true, that the members are electing you as board members to find the best people to represent them on the board. That's your role as board members. And so for me, they still have to be elected to the board by the members. And if you do a number of these other strategies, you'll also get people who you weren't targeting necessarily, who you then go through the process of vetting and maybe say, yeah, they would be a good person. There isn't any reason for us not to have them run for the election. So yes, I do believe it's democratic because in the end, the members are electing the board members. And then we have, let's see. Oh, do you think that decreasing your board from, say, 9 members to 7 members is a good strategy to combat board turnover? Actually, I don't, because you're making your board smaller. And yes, it might help you for a couple of years. But in actuality, I think that it could create some issues. I think you just need to really have a good process in place to find good people, good associate directors, good volunteers who could be potential board members. I think that's a better strategy than playing with the number of board members that you have. Okay, so it doesn't look like there are any other questions at this point. If you do have any questions, just type those in. All right, so a lot of people say to me, you know what, you always come to us, and you're always giving presentations on board succession planning and telling us what could happen and what are good strategies and that sort of thing, but you never tell us, okay, how do you do a board succession plan? What kind of help is out there? And what I told you earlier is I've developed this software for board succession planning. I'm going to give you a great deal on it in a little bit. I just want to show you. I'm going to go right to the software, just briefly show you the software and some of the things that it can do. So this is the landing page of the software. Everyone, it's web-based, so everyone's given a unique username and password for their credit union. You see the credit union name here at the top. You add your mission, vision, statement of values, and key priorities. You're given templates on a memo to use for your board members, the intentions forms, the competency letter form. All of this is included. And, you know, I usually am working, so far, I haven't had any credit union actually take the software and do it themselves. I or a consultant have gone in and led people through, led the full board. I like the full board to be involved in this. But the software, first of all, you have to come up with competencies. So what competencies would I like to have on the board? And so what I've done in the software is I've given you suggested competencies. And so you can pick any of these that you want to, and I've actually defined them. So you will pick them, and I have some that I've already picked on here, and I've already defined them, given you a description, but you can go ahead and customize the description to fit your credit union. So I go through this with credit unions, and then I say, is the competency critical? A critical competency that you have to have at least one person who has that competency on your board? Is it a mandatory? Does everybody have to have that competency? Like we see down here, financial literacy and fiduciary responsibility will be on here too. Or is it just desirable? Like sometimes people will say, you know what? I think legal experience would be great to have on the board. Is it critical? No, we don't think so. Although I have had some credit unions that think it is, which is great. But you might say, no, that's really desirable. So that would be a desirable competency. So you'd pick whether it's critical or mandatory or desirable. Then we have a tab for board members. You'd list all of your board members. You can add a new board member. You can add new, or you can delete here. You don't have to add the date of birth. Some of my credit union clients say, I want to target, we're targeting for our members, a certain member. So let's say 30-year-old to 45-year-olds. So we'd like to target that for our board members. Now, you have to be aware of the laws, even for volunteers in your state. So it may be different in your state, but in a lot of states you can target certain ages. So that's why we have that. That is not mandatory, the birth date. Whether the person is an active board member or not, because you can have other, you can add other people on here so that you can do modeling. Their board start date, so it'll come up with a whole list of years. Their next election year, their successive election year, and then here's what's important. We ask each of the board members to fill out an intentions form, like I said. So it comes up, we put in their departure year. When did they say they might leave? When is the possible departure start? When is the earliest year they could leave? Or when is the last year that they'd ever want to be on the board? Maybe for this person, he said, I want to leave in 2017, but I could stay until 2019. But this person said, my departure year is 2018. I could leave earlier, but I'm not staying any longer. And then we also have all of the competencies listed here across the top. And you would then, for each person, put in whether they have that competency or not. So you can also click on that to get the definition. And then what happens after you have all this information is you actually get a table that will show you, excuse me, what when people will be leaving, what gaps you might have. And so if we look at this, the purple bar here, at the end of the purple bar, A. Andrews will be leaving in 2017 or would like to, but this green shading says he could leave anytime between 2015 and 2018. B. Bailey said, I'd like to leave in 2018, if you remember that. I could leave earlier, but I'm not going to stay longer than 2018. So that's what's provided here. And then these blue boxes are their election years. So you can kind of get an idea of when their election years are also. So what this shows at the bottom is that in 2018, they will be missing 2 of the critical competencies unless they find somebody to fill those. And we also say we don't want more than 1 person leaving in a year. In 2016 and 2018, they'll have 2 people leaving each year. So they have to take a look at this flexibility to see what they could do, ask people to leave early or to stay longer. So this gives the overall view, but we also have what we call a year view, saying, okay, well, who is leaving and what competencies are we going to be looking for? So that shows here the people who are leaving, and it shows here what those critical competencies are. And then from this information, we go back to the competencies and we say to the Board Development Committee, help us determine what we should be looking for. And here's where we add, well, we should find somebody, because what we saw on the succession plan in the year view is that we're going to need board governance and finance and economics. So we go back here, board governance, find potential board members who have find potential board candidates who have board experience and potential board leadership experience. And you can also, so you would type that in, and then you can prioritize these. And it'll come up in priority order on your final report. So then what happens, that's all. The consultants lead you through this entire process. It generally takes 2 to 3 hours. And what's really nice about the software is after you have the first report, you get a license to the software for a year, and you can renew it every year. And you can go in and update this on an annual basis. You just click on the Create Report button, and within several seconds, a PDF of your report will appear on the screen, which then you can save or print. And it shows all of your board members, all of your mission statements, each of the competencies, a summary of the competencies, your active people who have those competencies, but then also list each of your board members. I'm still on the competencies, sorry. It lists each of your board members then, and the basic information about them, and all the competencies that they have. It'll show you, it'll give you that chart, the overall chart, and then the more specific chart of what to look for. And most importantly, I think, is it gives you a plan, a development and recruitment plan of what to look for in the next board members. So that's the software. And so what I'd like to do now is give you, for being on the webinar, I'd like to give you a special deal. And like I said, it takes 2 to 3 hours. It's facilitated in person. I like the full board to be there. I will actually be the facilitator for this. For those of you who want to do it on the webinar, you get a comprehensive, like I said, succession planning report. We go through this whole process. I have everything on the screen as we go through it. You see it as you go along. You get a license to use succession software for a year. You can update it then. The normal cost would be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. But for the participants of the webinar, if you contact me, I will do it. I will come to your credit union and do it for $4,000 plus expenses. And so you can contact me at yvonne@leadtoexceed.com to let me know if you're interested in having me come out there. Also, this is the email if you'd like information on the sample policy for associate directors, as well as I also have an emeritus director sample policy that some people have requested in the past, because that's another way to kind of get people to leave the board, is to have them as emeritus people. And of course, emeritus people, there's a couple ways to do that. One is some credit unions will have all of their former board members be emeritus. But like what we do and a number of other credit unions that I know do is you have to be nominated by your board to become an emeritus director, and you get all of the board packets You get some travel. This is what we do. You get some travel for 5 years, just like other board members, but you don't vote. And you don't necessarily attend other events unless the board chair, invites you. Because a lot of times emeritus directors don't attend on a regular basis board meetings. So if you invited them to your strategic planning, it might be a little bit disruptive because they haven't been hearing what's going on throughout the year. So anyway, if you want any of those forms, just send me an email at yvonne@leadtoexceed.com. So again, board succession planning is extremely important. I have done the recording. I hope this recorded well. I will send you the recording of the session so you can look at it again or share it with other board members. If you want this special deal, please let me know. Give me, and if you're not sure if it's right for your credit union, send me an email. We can set up a strategy session and we can talk about it. So I want to see if there's any other last questions. Doesn't look like there are. I want to thank you for being here today. I hope you got at least one nugget of information out of the webinar. Board succession planning as well as CEO succession planning is extremely important. I hope that you will take this information and use it in your credit union. Also, I do want to mention that the CEO Succession Planning Solution coming out September 30th. You can go to my website and look for more information there. But thank you again for coming. I hope you all have a great night.